Welcome everyone. My name is Mark Medeiros. I am the Community Engagement Manager at Peninsula Open Space Trust, also known as POST. And on behalf of POST, as well as our partners at San Mateo County Parks, we'd like to welcome you today to our discussion about Tunitas Creek Beach. First, we'd like to say that the land in our working area has been home to many distinct communities of Native people since time immemorial. We work to conserve and care for these lands, the ancestral territory of the Ama Mutsun, Muwekmo Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone, and Tamiya Nation. These indigenous communities are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. Wherever you are, please pause to acknowledge the Native people whose land you are on, and feel free to share their names in chat. We'll actually be sharing more about the history of Native people in this particular area we'll be discussing, Tunitas Creek Beach, along the way today. And as usual, we'd like to share a couple of words about Peninsula Open Space Trust. This map will show you our working area. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization working in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and northern Santa Cruz counties. Since 1977, through the support of our generous donors, we've been able to protect 80,000 acres of land, much of which is now part of our public park system, managed by many public agency partners such as San Mateo County Parks. Next, we'd like to share about San Mateo County Parks, our partners for this event and for this project. San Mateo County Parks' goal is to provide our community with recreational opportunities in a safe and effective manner, and to protect and enhance the natural resources of the county. County Parks operates 24 separate parks encompassing over 16,000 acres and 190 miles of county and local trails, including 3 regional trails. Parks are located throughout the county and represent a wide variety of natural settings, including coastside marine reserve, bayside recreational areas, coastal mountain woodland areas, and urban sites. Today, we are going to hear about a project that POST and San Mateo County Parks has been working on together for several years, planning new public access at Tunitas Creek Beach. Between Half Moon Bay and Pescadero, there's a 1-mile stretch of beach that has been known to many Bay Area residents as a local treasure for surfers, fishermen, and recreational users. But the beach has faced major challenges in these years due to erosion, trash buildup, habitat destruction, and other issues. So thanks to our collective efforts at POST, San Mateo County Parks, and other partners, this beach is going to be open to the public in the future, with a holistic plan balancing a wide variety of recreational uses for all, as well as accounting for the needs of wildlife and the sensitive habitats that they depend on. So to describe this project today, we have 2 wonderful experts joining us, Taylor Jang and Katherine Wright. And let me share a little bit about these 2 awesome people. Taylor Jang is a stewardship project manager at Peninsula Open Space Trust, focusing on public access and farmland projects. He grew up in the East Bay and also serves on the board of the Bay Area Ridge Trail Council. Katherine Wright is an interpretive park ranger for San Mateo County Parks. Her work focuses on environmental education, community engagement, and equity. So 2 very knowledgeable people who are going to share a lot today. With that, I'd like to welcome them to the program. Hey, Taylor. Hey, Katherine.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, nice to see you both. Thanks for taking the time today. And welcome everybody who's in chat already. I see that you all are pretty excited, already chatting away. So yeah, Katherine, before we came on, you were sharing that you're kind of in a unique facility at County Parks for this webinar today. Can you tell us where you're at?
Yes, this is our sign shop where we create all of our signs and banners for the department. And we have some really cool displays in the sign shop. So we have a dragon behind me. This is part of our kite festival that we try to do each year, and we're hoping to bring it back next year at Coyote Point.
That's awesome. It makes sense to me now that a large regional park district would need their own sign making shop. Didn't occur to me before, but that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And how long have you been at County Parks? Can you share a little bit about your history and what you do there?
Yeah, so I started working with County Parks in 2010, 11 years already. And I started working as a ranger in 2014. And I lead our interpretive program, and we do a lot of really great work with the community, providing environmental education and outreach opportunities, and now especially focusing on equitable access to parks.
That's awesome, Katherine. And thank you for sharing your extensive natural history and regional history knowledge with us today. I'm excited to hear what you have to share. And also, we've got Taylor here. Hey, Taylor, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Excited to be here.
Great. And you've been partnering with our with folks at County Parks for a while now on this project. Can you just say in a couple words how long you've been engaged in the planning efforts and something along
Sure.
those lines?
Yeah, it's hard to believe, but we started working on this project together in 2016. And so I've been involved with this for a number of different years and phases of the project. So all the way through park acquisition and due diligence, the early community input phase, hiring a consultant team, and now working on park designs. And so it's exciting to see it progress through all these different stages. And I'm looking forward to when we can finally welcome folks out there.
Great. Well, also thank you to you for making the time, and welcome to the audience. I'll share right now that we're going to be hearing first from Katherine with a little bit of context setting and natural history about the site, the coast area, and the habitats that we have there. And following that, we're going to be hearing more about the planning process, the history of the project to open Tunitas Creek Beach from Taylor. And if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to share them in chat and feel free to engage with comments there. And we will also make time at the end for some of your questions. So with that, let's turn it over to Katherine. Thank you, folks.
All right. Thank you, Mark. So as I had mentioned before, I lead our interpretive program for County Parks, and we're really excited to speak with you today about one of our newest additions to our park system, Tunitas Creek Beach. And Taylor will be going into the specifics about our planning process, as Mark mentioned. But before that, I want to dive into a brief background of the site and speak to some of the interesting geological, ecological, and historical information that is relevant for this site. And it will be a sneak peek, if you will, into some of our future programming opportunities that we will have at this new park. So first, I want to orient you to where Tunitas Creek Beach is located. You can see the marker at the bottom right of your screen, Tunitas Creek Beach. It is south of Half Moon Bay and north of San Gregorio along our coastside. And you can see there are a variety of properties protected inland from Tunitas Creek Beach as well, including the Tunitas Creek Open Space Preserve that's managed by Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. All right, so first I want to start off with a brief overview of the geology of this area. And one of my first geology courses in college, the professor remarked that geology is quite literally the foundation for the layout of an ecosystem. So, the type of rock formation that you have in a location establishes the soil composition, which then in turn affects the species composition of plants and other creatures that form the food web and really, establish what the ecosystem is going to be like. And the underlying geological forces as well also affects the topography of that area. And we can see much of that present at Tunitas Creek Beach. About 25 million years ago, the subduction of the Pacific tectonic plate under the North American plate caused the formation of the San Andreas Fault, which runs up through California. And in the Bay Area, we have many faults that branch off of the San Andreas Fault, including the San Gregorio Fault, which is pictured here on the right. You can see it going north-south, and it comes out pretty much right at a little bit south of Tunitas Creek Beach. And most of the movement of this fault is lateral, meaning north and south, but there is some upward movement as well that has raised these picturesque bluffs that we know Tunitas Creek Beach for, and much of the San Mateo County coastline, as well as the Santa Cruz Mountains. And the bluffs at Tunitas are part of what we call the Prisma Formation, which is made up of sandstone, and that was formed by fine-sized grains of sand that accumulated layer after layer about 5 million years ago in the shallow ocean waters offshore. And that's actually very similar to what the sediment deposition is happening offshore today. Also at Tunitas Creek Beach, you can find fossils of ancient clam shells and other marine organisms at the north and south ends of the beach, which you can see little stars indicated on this map as well. So there's lots of really cool geological information, and we'll definitely be featuring some programs in the future with more information about this site. Tunitas Creek Beach property as a whole is approximately 58 acres, and it includes panoramic ocean views and nearly a mile of sandy beach, as you can see in this panoramic shot. The property supports a wide diversity of habitats, including the marine system, sandy beach, dunes, coastal scrub, a coastal prairie on the terraces, a Monterey pine forest, freshwater marsh, creek riparian corridor, and even some intertidal habitats in the rocky reefs off of the beach at the north and south ends. And one of the species that really relies on the habitat at this beach is the snowy plover. And here's a picture of a snowy plover and its babies. You can see in the area that I indicated with the red circle on the picture, that is prime snowy plover nesting habitat at Tunitas Creek Beach. And snowy plovers are a federally threatened species due to human disruption of their nests and loss of habitat. They're about 6 inches long, and the breeding season lasts from between March and September, and they're super cute. And as part of our work on this beach to support that species, we will be installing some fencing around their area to prevent people from disrupting their habitat. Tunitas Creek itself is a very important feature of this site. The watershed for this creek extends far inland, and it covers about 12 square miles. And here's a map of that watershed. Much of the watershed is privately owned, and in the past there was some significant logging operations and some agriculture. But in the map that I showed in the first slide, it showed that Tunitas Creek Open Space Preserve is just to the west or east of Tunitas Creek Beach, and that protects a significant amount of land that flows into this watershed that's a part of this creek. The watershed and this creek support a number of species, including the threatened steelhead trout and the Dungeness crab. And over the years, the Dungeness crab, there's been lots of crab poaching at Tunitas Creek Beach, so that is something that we'll be aware of in our management of the property. The property supports lots of species beyond the 3 that I have mentioned, lots of rare, endangered, and unique species, including lots of the ones featured here, and even a rare plant called the coastal marsh milk vetch, which I'll show a picture of here. This page is a screenshot from iNaturalist.org, and you can go on to iNaturalist and take a look at all the observations that have been made at Tunitas Creek Beach to date. So far, over 400 106 observations have been made, and 158 species have been identified in this amazing site. We actually led a BioBlitz in June this year with a group of 14 people who came out with their smartphones, and we walked around the site to try to make some more observations and discoveries. So iNaturalist is a free app that you can use to make discoveries, add to scientific knowledge of different areas, and it's a really useful tool for individuals as well as land use managers. All right, so that's kind of a background of the geology of our site and the ecology and some interesting species that you can find there. And I'm going to do a brief dive into the human history of this site, starting with the Ohlone people. So the first known residents of this site are the Ohlone peoples. The Cotajan tribe of the coast had a village site here called the Taros village site. And you can see it on this map. It says Taros and then underneath Cotajan. There is estimated that the Cotajan tribe had a population of about 65 people split between two village sites. There's two sites just north and south of each other. This is one of 5 distinct cultural groups along the coast in San Mateo County, and you can see the others featured on this map as well. The Ohlone people have a deep connection to the land and a long history with the land. And archaeological digs, one of which that was held at Fitzgerald Marine Reserve, have discovered items such as this crescent-shaped stone that date back to at least 8,000 years ago. So they have a long history with this land, but unfortunately that history changed pretty rapidly. In 1769, Gaspar de Portola led an expedition up the coast of California in search of for Monterey Bay. They passed Monterey Bay and made it the above route that you can see on this next portion of the slide. And these are the dates that they were at these different locations as they passed through San Mateo County. And as they passed through, they stopped at all the different Ohlone villages that we had on the last map as they made their way north. And on November 4th, there was this discovery site up at Sweeney Ridge. They discovered San Francisco Bay, seeing it for the first time as Europeans seeing it for the first time. And this expedition would forever change the course of history for the Ohlone people and the development of what would become California. At San Mateo County Parks, we have worked with a variety of agencies to create the Ohlone Portola Heritage Trail project to follow the route of this historic expedition and to honor the history of the Ohlone people. And Tunitas Creek Beach is an important site along this future trail. And so just a little bit more history of this site as we move forward in time. There was the Spanish era, which started with the Portola expedition and then led to missions and forts being created throughout California, as well as in San Mateo County and San Francisco County. And the Ohlone peoples were brought into these missions and forts, unfortunately, and changed their way of life forever. These missions and forts lasted until the Mexican War of Independence, in which the New Spain ceded Alta California to Mexico, and the era of Mexican land grants took over, also known as ranchos. And for Tunitas Creek Beach on this map on the right, you can see Rancho Cañada de Verde y Arroyo de la Purisma, and Rancho San Gregorio. Tunitas Creek Beach was kind of at the meeting of those two ranchos, and was managed by two different individuals for the next period of time. And then in 1846, disputes, new settlers came to the land in search of gold, and they started developing the land in other ways. So This is a famous photo. If anyone's familiar with Tunitas Creek Beach, this is one of the most famous photos of the history of this site. This is Gordon Chute. Alexander Gordon was a builder and local resident who moved to San Mateo County in 1863. He acquired a lot of land that he farmed and logged, and he had a logging company called Gordon's Lumber that was farther inland from Tunitas Creek Beach. Gordon Chute was a ramp that he created to carry goods and lumber from nearby Grabtown down to a ship loading dock below. It was assembled in 1872 and lasted until 1885. This 45-degree angle ramp was built into the cliffs at Tunitas Creek. It wasn't very practical, however, as conditions had to be ideal for ships to be loaded. So high tides and calm seas were needed, and that's not always the case. There's also reports that some burlap sacks would speed down the chute so fast that they would catch fire because of the friction before they would actually make it to the bottom, which would have endangered the ship below. The chute was eventually abandoned and swept away by a storm in 1885. But you can still see the bolts of this apparatus in the rock walls at Tunitas Creek Beach and in the cement foundations off of the reef from this bluff. On the right-hand side of this page, you can see a photo of people in a cart that are taken along the Tunitas Creek Turnpike. So on the east side of Tunitas Creek Road is Kings Mountain Road. And in 1868, there's a turnpike called the Redwood City and San Gregorio Turnpike that was built on the east side. And that carried people up to the Skyline Ridge. And then in 1875, Gordon and a partner named Fromont built the Tunitas Creek Turnpike that took people down from Skyline all the way out to the coast. And they would charge people to travel over the ridge to the coast side in a cart or a apparatus such as this. The bottom right photo is a photo of the some of the logging operations that occurred inland from Tunitas Creek Beach. Next, in our history of the site, we have the Ocean Shore Railroad. So the Ocean Shore Railroad construction began in 1908 or 1905, and the funders of this wanted to create a connector between San Francisco and Santa Cruz, but the construction never made it past Tunitas Creek southward. As you can see on the map on the right, there is a variety of stops that you can see along the way, and there's a dotted section in the middle that was the proposed route, but that never connected. And so there were sections that were built north from Santa Cruz and south from San Francisco, making it all the way to Tunitas and then stopping there. They had issues with funding, and constant rock slides at Devil's Slide were causing lots of issues with their funding and having to reconstruct that section. So the railroad eventually went bankrupt in the 1920s. But in this photo here, if you look closely enough, you can see Highway 1 in the photo of Tunitas, and alongside Highway 1 to the west of it, there's a depression in the land where there is actually, you can see the trace of where the grade was for the railway, for the Ocean Shore Railroad, and it's still present from an aerial view. And in this time, so here's a flyer or brochure for Reaches the Beaches, the Ocean Shore Railroad. And here's a picture of it crossing at Devil's Slide. And here's a picture at Tunitas. This was a connection option for people to go from Tunitas to the Swanton station. It was a 26-mile gap between those two stations, and people would have to get off at Tunitas and take this shuttle bus down to Swanton if they wanted to continue their route southward. All right, so a couple more slides of notable figures. This is Grafton Tyler Brown. He was an African-American painter, lithographer, and cartographer. He was born in Pennsylvania, and he moved out west and lived in San Francisco. He is a famous lithographer, and you might have seen his famous painting of Gordon Chute, as you can see below. And there's also a painting that he had done of the Gordon's Ranch in San Gregorio and above the Gordon home in Redwood City. Another notable figure is Sybil Easterly, and you can see her on the right there. She was an artist that lived at Tunitas Creek. She graduated from the San Francisco Mark Hopton School of Art, and she gained notoriety across the country for her paintings. Here's an example of some of the paintings that she made in her life, and they are found at the San Mateo County Historical Museum. She married a wealthy young bachelor who opened a saloon along the Ocean Shore Railroad tracks in 1915. So they had a saloon at that last stop at Tunitas Creek. She lived at Tunitas Creek until her passing in the early 1960s. Okay, so that's a little bit about the history of this place and some of the notable figures that have played a role in the development of this land over time. And since San Mateo County Parks has worked with Post to acquire this land, we've put on several events. We've done some beach cleanups to help clean up the area, and Taylor will be speaking a little bit more about this next. And we've also done a BioBlitz event, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of capture some more of that biodiversity that we have present on the site. So this is all that I have to speak on today, and I'll pass it back to Mark.
Thank you, Katherine. Learned a lot right there. It's something we talk about a lot, how as local residents, we develop a greater and greater appreciation for these places as we learn layers of natural history and layers of the human history of these locations. So it's just so cool to have all this in my head the next time I go out to San Mateo Coast. I'm sure a lot of the viewers feel the same way, and it's going to be so great for the community to get to learn about this from you and other interpreters in the future at Tunitas Creek Beach. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking forward to being able to educate people on site and provide programmings for people to learn about all these different topics that I mentioned today.
Awesome. Well, great. So now we're going to hear from Taylor, taking us, from the time that Tunitas Creek Beach was most recently privately owned to acquisition for conservation to now planning with county parks, right, Taylor?
That's right.
All right, so let's turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Mark. So there's a long history of community activism at the beach, and that actually led to Post and Parks' initial involvement. And so I'll be providing some of the more recent history, as well as an overview of our park planning process. And so this beautiful slide that you see in front of you came about in the early 2010s when Tunitas Creek Beach became the site of large-scale raves, campouts, bonfires, and there's no services currently or at that time at the beach itself. So no trash pickup, no restrooms, difficult access to the beach, and pretty dangerous conditions, both on Highway 1 and in the water. So car break-ins, poaching of crabs, as Katherine mentioned, really difficult issues for first responders and others. And it was creating both a public safety hazard as well as kind of an environmental disaster. And so TLC Locals is a beach cleanup crew that started conducting beach cleanups at Tunitas, and then eventually petitioned Post and San Mateo County Parks to get involved. There are 2 bluff properties that provide access to the sandy beach area, and Post purchased the southern one in 2017 from the former owner for $5 million. And one of the first things we did was we moved to initiate county park ranger patrols, and there's been huge improvements in environmental and public safety conditions since then. So in this slide, you can see some of the former conditions along Tunitas Creek Road, kind of a very narrow road with lots of vehicles parked here, a beach cleanup in the upper left, and some of the remains on the bottom 2 pictures here. So immediately after acquisition, one of the first things the partners did was to establish a community advisory committee representing a variety of perspectives: recreation, environmental protection, education, locals and neighbors to the coast side. So we started understanding that we're building a new park from scratch, but that there was some history of prior responsible use, and we wanted to understand community needs, community priorities, and everyone's various histories with the beach. And eventually we put together kind of a guiding vision for this next stage of park development. We met 6 times from 2018 to 2019, and we drafted 4 core values that you see here. These are displayed as the 4 E's: environment, equity, education, and experience. And the team still uses these to help us guide the decision-making process. Next, we turned our attention to what it would take to provide safe, environmentally sustainable access to the beach. And we called this the Tunitas Creek Beach Improvement Project. We hired a consultant team to help lead the engineering, the park designs, the permitting, and more. And their logos are shown at the base of these slides. So next up, these next couple of slides are some of the existing conditions. And so this is an aerial of the property looking south. And so you can see right here, Tunitas Creek running through the middle, and it's bounded, the property itself is bounded to the north by Tunitas Creek and to the south by this knoll. It's 58 acres in total, and some of the major features are called out in boxes: Highway 1, an existing abandoned residence, and Tunitas Creek running through the middle of the beach here. And these in italics are the zones of the property that the team has kind of divided up into different experiences. And so there's the top of the bluff, the mid bluff, and the beach, which I'll be coming back to later. This is an aerial shot looking north. There's an existing Caltrans pullout, which will be converted into a primary parking area. And traffic studies indicate peak usage at about 60 cars, which is the number of stalls that will be constructed, reserving some areas for overflow parking and paratransit bus parking for classes and other group programs. The other thing I'll mention here is that motorist speed is an issue. And so there have been a number of accidents on this bridge that span Tunitas Creek, and sight lines, signage, other safety measures are currently being discussed with Caltrans. This next slide is the existing driveway, which would be used for maintenance vehicles, park staff, others that have difficulty walking down to the mid-bluff area. To the right, you can see the fencing where we have a proposed ranger residence and nature walk. And to the left of this driveway is where the accessible pedestrian path would go. This is an overhead shot of the mid-bluff area. And this here, the existing residence, which would be demolished to make way for visitor serving amenities. And here's the view from the top of the access path to the beach. You can see the snowy plover protection zone at the base of the photo in the bottom left, and Tunitas Creek, which runs seasonally to the ocean along the middle of the screen here. And we're hoping that we can provide kind of a safe, environmentally friendly access path, which would deposit visitors just to the left over here. So to help with park designs, the team held 2 rounds of community engagement with surveys and a variety of potential park designs. The major findings from our community engagement process are here in bold, and demographic information from our respondents is to the right. The team had a really productive partnership with Caron to engage Spanish language speakers. We also took the project to our local environmental science high school classes in Pacifica and Half Moon Bay to engage local youth. And the main findings from these surveys guided our design process generally, as well as with specific amenities. So this is kind of a schematic which shows where development would be concentrated. And so you can see here Highway 1 running across the top of your screen with much of the development concentrated in this top of bluff area where there would be a parking area and an overlook. As you move down into this mid bluff area, there would be some structures, some visitor serving amenities, native planting restoration, and there would be minimal development along this lower area, mostly reserved for a loop trail and other restoration efforts. And then finally, no development on the beach itself. And so this provides for a number of different experiences for different user groups. And so it's everyone from folks that want to stop as part of a road trip down Highway 1, take in the view at the viewpoint and continue on their way, to people that may want to attend an interpretive program at the amphitheater, go down to the mid-bluff for a picnic, and then finally folks that may want to do all 3 of those things and eventually go down to the beach for a full day. And so we think that this kind of division of the property into zones both fits with the property constraints, which I'll touch on momentarily, as well as provides for a number of different experiences for everyone. So here are the main natural hazards that we're considering. The geologic instability of the property. It's a very active landslide zone, as well as sea level rise. And so the arrows in this figure point to active landslides, and there are a number of dormant ones that are not shown here. The team has a general philosophy to design with nature. So we make managing water and preventing erosion the top priorities, rather than going to expensive engineering solutions like retaining walls or earth moving. So the second major issue that we're thinking about is sea level rise. And you can see the existing mean high water mark in light blue, and then flood elevations in darker blue. And so right here, flood elevations, mean high water, and the ones a little bit to the east show projections of sea level rise. So again, decreasing development intensity as we move westward from the highway, kind of fitting with our design philosophy to design with nature rather than trying to engineer our way out of these issues. So here are the preferred conceptual park designs, and these were approved by the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors in February after a number of rounds of community engagement and input, as I mentioned earlier. You can see the 3 zones of the property reflected here, kind of the top of bluff, the mid bluff, and the beach. And then a couple other details like a loop trail here, which would go to the south and provide a southern beach entrance, as well as restoration efforts. And this would include some of the existing dangerous and eroding trails down the bluff and restoration of those trails, as well as native plantings along the mid-bluff area. And it's an estimated 8 to 12 minute walk from the top of the bluff here all the way down to the beach. And I'll be walking through the different zones of the property next. So here is our top of bluff. We'd have 60 parking stalls constructed here, including this drop-off zone, which would be for beach gear or families, and then a couple different parking bays here, including accessible parking, and eventually an area where overflow parking could be held for paratransit buses or other larger vehicles. And then a turnaround circle and eventually an exit. So one way through and then one way out. The other thing I'll mention here is that there would be a overlook point where folks could take in the view, and that this would eventually be a connection both for the Ohlone Portola Heritage Trail that Katherine mentioned earlier, as well as the California Coastal Trail. And so we're planning for that. No plans currently because we don't have connections to the north or south, but it's a key piece in kind of the overall puzzle. Here's a rendering of the top of the bluff and the overlook site with our existing conditions over here to the right in this smaller slide. We'd underground the utilities, provide accessible parking for folks with mobility challenges, and this overlook area would help prevent the mixing of pedestrians and the hikers or cyclists that are passing through. And as Mark mentioned earlier, we're going to have an Indigenous Peoples Land Acknowledgement plaque, and we've been working with the Native tribes to come up with exact wording here, but I think this would help anchor the site in its natural and human history, as well as help celebrate some of the earliest peoples. So this area is the transition from the top of the bluff down to the mid bluff in the lower left of the screen. And so the first thing I'll note is that we've got two different paths that kind of congregate and eventually lead to a pedestrian access path with stops and benches along the way in case people need to take a rest or want to take in the view. And this would be the main access path for people trying to access the beach or the mid bluff area. The existing driveway, as I mentioned earlier, would be reserved for parks administrative access. And teeing off of the driveway here, where the fence formerly was, we'd have a ranger residence and a nature walk. And so this would be kind of a flexible programming space where you could collect your classroom or your group up top away from the hustle and bustle of the mid bluff, which the team thinks is going to be a gathering place, not only for the picnic areas, but also because of the interpretive panels, as well as the amphitheater and the views of the beach itself. The existing trees here are, the existing circles on the map are trees. As Katherine mentioned, there's a Monterey pine forest here, and so making efforts to preserve trees where we can and wind the path through the tree cover down here. Here's a rendering of the mid bluff looking south. And so one of the first things that you would see as you come down the pedestrian path is picnic tables, an amphitheater here, number 3, and a viewing deck to the south. As you move through the site itself, number 5 here is an interpretive grove where there'd be panels telling some of the history of the site itself. And then number 7 and 8 here, we've got 2 placeholder buildings for a ranger station and public resident restrooms. So designs and materials still to come on that, but we envision that's where these 2 sites would go. And the team thinks that this will be kind of a hub of activity and gathering on the property with views, seating, programming, and other amenities. Here's another view of the mid bluff from the access path with Tunitas bluffs in the background. And this final slide is a depiction of the loop trail, which would go from the top of the bluff to the south and eventually wind down to provide an alternative access to the southern beach area, as well as a hiking experience about 2 miles long with some really spectacular views, some seating, and some elevation change. And the team is still working on the exact alignment, but you can see conceptually in the bottom right what we have planned for the loop trail. To wrap up, here's our next steps. And so in February, as I mentioned, the team presented preferred conceptual park designs to the Board of Supervisors, and that was approved at that meeting. And we then rolled into the spring and summer, which we're currently in, where we're preparing our environmental document consistent with CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And we expect to release that within the next 2 to 3 weeks here. And that will transition us into the next round of both public input into the CEQA document, as well as final designs and permitting. And so this fall and winter, the team is going to be moving through additional levels of construction-ready drawings. So at 35%, at 66%, and eventually to wrap up in the winter with a set of construction drawings, which we'll go to bid for and eventually commence construction in summer of 2022, with an eventual park opening in spring of 2023. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark again to close us out.
Thank you, Tyler. That was really amazing to hear the level of detail and complexity to the planning that's been going on. And one of the things that I was reflecting on as I was listening to you is that this is a microcosm of the type of planning that goes on for all of our public open spaces. And it's amazing to think about, the natural resource planning, the environmental planning, planning around wildlife, and then thinking about community input processes to integrate community input and figure out the human element of how we want to use these parks. And it's generally a very extensive process for all these parks that we have. It sometimes takes years. I know oftentimes folks wonder, like, oh, I heard this area was protected. When is it going to be open to the public? And so if you're wondering that, this is the type of thing that's going on in those intervening years, is really thoughtful, extensive planning. So it's really impressive what we've all been up to and all the community input we got. And another reflection that I'm having is the power of community. You were sharing how there were community groups even before the property was acquired, advocating for Tunitas Creek Beach. And then we, came together, our donor community provided funds so that we could purchase the property. And then, the wonderful team at San Mateo County Parks monitoring, doing planning, and making sure that community input is integrated. So really kudos to all of us here in the Peninsula and Bay Area community for doing a good job with this place. And I don't know if either of you have any comments on those kind of reflections before we head into questions. And while we're doing that, I encourage any of you who are watching to ask any questions to Taylor and Katherine. Yeah, I guess I said it well, in terms of those reflections. So why don't we start with one thing that we know gets asked quite a bit by the community about usage. We were talking about this before the program started, and that's, for example, dogs in public access. Can either of you folks speak to dogs and planning around dogs for Tunitas Creek Beach or in general at parks?
So as it's currently managed, dogs are not permitted on the beach at Tunitas Creek. But as a department at County Parks, we are currently undergoing feasibility studies to determine the future of dog use in our parks. So I'm not sure what the future will hold for this particular property and that particular use. I also saw a question about equestrian use of the site, and I would say the same answer for that question. We haven't really addressed that use yet in consideration for this site. But as far as, parking, because I know that horses are, or equestrians are part of the California Coastal Trail, those dirt pullout areas that Taylor highlighted in the upper bluff area, those could be used for buses or, potentially for horse trailers too, that they wouldn't have demarcated stalls. So I believe that would be, something that we'll be considering as we move forward in the process.
Yeah, there you go. And it's another great example of that balancing act that our parks agencies need to do around natural resource protection and human uses. We all love our dogs, and some places you could take them, some places you can't. And there's a lot of thoughtful consideration into those decisions, about that balance. And thanks for sharing a little bit about that. Yeah, if either of y'all see a question you'd like to answer, feel free to take it. But I'll pose another one from Chris, and maybe you have some detail about this. Just talking about the social trails that had evolved over time, trails that people kind of just established without planning. It just became a trail that people use. That's what a social trail is. And all the erosion issues that have arisen from those trails. Can either of you say anything about efforts to kind of stabilize or restore those areas?
Sure, yeah, and that's actually the work that's immediately in front of the team. And so we have kind of the concept of restoration that was approved in February of this year. And now we're moving into these next level drawings where we're making decisions around materials, around what gets planted where. And that will be happening this fall with some additional rounds of community input. So stay tuned for what that looks like, but generally that's the progression of the project.
There you go. Thank you, Taylor. Yeah, and I appreciated what was shared about accessibility for different types of users. And we had a question from Sue about wheelchairs, and can you reiterate or share a little bit more about, to the extent that there'll be like ADA access or wheelchair accessibility? I know it's challenging with the beach.
Sure. Yeah, so we American Disability Act, ADA for short, the team wanted to make sure that to the extent possible, we could accommodate as many users as we could. And so the grade and the geologic stability is such that the area from the upper bluff all the way down to the mid bluff can accommodate an ADA path. And so that will be wheelchair accessible. And we think that that's going to be a really great option for folks to come sit a little bit shielded from the highway noise by the Monterey Pine Forest, take in some of the views of the beach itself with the picnic areas, the amphitheater, and other activities along the mid-bluff. And unfortunately, due to some of the very active landslides that go from mid-bluff down to the beach itself, we're not able to make the that path fully accessible from mid-bluff to beach, but we are planning for improvements like a handrail and other steps along the way to help make the path as accessible as possible. But unfortunately, the grade won't meet ADA standards for that final path to the beach itself.
Got it. Thank you. We're all really invested in making these spaces as accessible and relevant to all sorts of people as possible, right? Yeah, maybe one or two more questions here. There were a couple of questions about costs, and this might be difficult to answer. Part of it might be difficult to answer. Another one I think is pretty easy to answer. And the first part was, do we have any ideas about the total costs for this project? That's probably kind of difficult to quantify. And then another question was about whether admission is going to be charged or not to recoup those costs. So either of you can speak to that, either of those parts at all?
I can speak to the admission portion. We won't be charging any admission to this property. It is actually moving forward. We're leaning towards not charging as much as possible in our parks for vehicle entry, as that can be a barrier to folks to access these places, and we don't want to have barriers in place as much as possible to provide more equitable access to everyone.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you, Katherine.
And I can provide some ballpark numbers to the cost side. For the construction, the team is currently estimating at the conceptual stage about $7 million for construction, and about $1 million for ongoing operation and maintenance. So that would be, all of the things that County Parks does so well with interpretive programs and enforcement of County Parks regulations, trash pickup, restroom cleaning, all of the things that make our parks beautiful. And so those are some of the initial and ongoing costs, and more to come on that as we get into further levels of design.
Wonderful. Thank you, Taylor and Katherine. Again, comments on that whole part is just once again thanking post donors who contributed to the initial acquisition of the property. And of course, with county parks, it's wonderful trying our best to not charge at these parks. And it's a reminder to all of us as citizens to think about how we support our county parks and our other regional parks agencies when the time comes where there's opportunity to support them with public policy. So I think we're getting close to the end of the hour now. So I just want to reserve a moment for a little call to action and next steps. We shared the link to the Tunitas Creek Beach Improvement Project website. Again, can either of you just remind us all of the next steps and things to look out for Tunitas Creek Beach?
Sure. So on that website, there's a mailing list. And so if you're interested in having periodic project updates, please sign up for the mailing list. We've got a exciting fall planned where we'll be releasing, further information about the project itself. And we hope to eventually have a open house on the beach itself, COVID permitting. And so those are two exciting things to kind of stay tuned for in the immediate future.
Thank you, Taylor. And lastly, I wanted to ask you, Katherine, in general about staying engaged with San Mateo County Parks. Is there anything you'd like to share? I think you mentioned there will be an interpretive program, kind of community input process coming up. And we also shared your events page in chat.
Yes, so the events page is a great place to stay in touch with all the programs that we have coming up in our county parks. Check that out, as all of them are featured on there. And we will be doing an interpretive strategic plan that we are in the middle of right now that'll basically define the future of our interpretive program and all the environmental education and community outreach programs that we provide in our county parks. And so you can contribute to that process, as we will be releasing a survey in the next few weeks. So stay tuned, check our website, our social media pages. We will be putting a bunch of notices out there about that survey, as we want to hear from you about what kind of programs and features you want to see in our parks to improve your access and your enjoyment and understanding of our beautiful, open spaces that we have in this county.
Great, Katherine. Thank you. And thank you for all of your sharing, Katherine and Taylor. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. And please stay posted on Post's website for more events. We have a wonderful general presentation about all of Post's work coming up next Friday too. So we hope to see you all back next week for that. And with that, I just hope you all have a great weekend. See you all soon.
Thanks everyone for joining.
All right.
Yes, thank
see you all. Take care.